Hello, my name is Deepak and you are watching Simcoe Community Media. During the January 10th General Committee meeting at the Barrie City Hall, the Council discussed and approved Affordable Housing Strategy for 2024. The consulting firm NBLC prepared a 50-page affordable housing strategy for the city, and staff prepared an additional supplementary report totaling 180 pages. However, Mayor Alex Nuttall criticized the report for its lack of simplicity, for ignoring the impact of immigrants and students on housing, and for its lack of solutions to address housing issues.
Two missing pieces to this were one on the causation side. It was really interesting that there was no touch on the effects of levels of immigration, and that would be through the formal process of immigration as well as through the student visa program, which is all over provincial and national news at the moment. And I'm an immigrant to Canada. I have no bias in this front, but there is a mathematical issue that exists in this country right now from everything I'm reading that says we have this many people coming in the country, but we're only making this many homes, and yet it wasn't touched on in the report as far as I could tell. The second thing I think was missing in the actual solution side was a pathway to home ownership. Like it identifies what 10% below market rates would be considered affordable, but what recommendations are put in place. There's recommendations on the rental side, for sure. What opportunities exist on the home ownership side?
The mayor asked the city's Director of Development Services, Michelle Banfield, whether the consultant and staff had discussed the impact of immigration on housing. Banfield did not have a clear answer to the mayor's question.
The consultant was just kind of like, look, this is where we're at. Like, these are the numbers. Immigration's not going to stop. There's really no paraphrase. Like, there's no point in kind of evaluating more and more about immigration policy. Immigration is happening. There was a little bit of a discussion about, kind of where people are coming from and whether they come to Barrie or what have you. Really wasn't part of the work that they did. It's probably the easiest way to put it.
Affordable student housing is another important issue in Barrie. Approximately half of the students at Georgian College are international, and Indian students constitute a major portion of that number. Mayor Nuttall referred to the impact of the students' origin on housing, questioning whether they have similar expectations, hopes, and dreams for housing. However, he did not make it clear why this should matter, or if the race of the students affect how they live.
Does the origin of the person moving to Barrie who's in need of affordable units, does it affect the built form on the back end in terms of the demand going forward, or can we look at it as everybody is the same? And maybe the answer is everybody's got the exact same expectations, hopes, and dreams, and so it doesn't matter. But for me, that's a question that I would have loved to have seen answered in here.
There were questions from other council members, primarily from Ward 1 Councillor Claire Ripma. He expressed concern over the lack of new rental units and housing affordability in the city.
Some of the numbers that really struck me was that we have got now 350 net new rental units in the last 20 years. Like, we haven't built any, really, when it comes down to rental units and the net increase. We have 5,000 renters living in unaffordable or unsuitable units, and we have something like 3,000 households waiting for social housing. And I agree that whether you're renting or whether you're trying to buy, we are, for the most part in this city, unaffordable, unless you're making a serious amount of dollars. But I want to focus just on the rental pieces first, and that is one of your 9 is a rental protection bylaw, and that strikes me as being something that is low-hanging fruit that we could easily do.
We actually have quite a few rental buildings either under construction or approved, like the Grove Street, they just got their site plan agreement registered. 37 Johnson is under construction, 233 Dunlop Street. So we actually have had, more like recently, so some good success stories. And we do really want to make sure that we can kind of keep those buildings for sure rental. So that would be most likely one of the quickest implementation tools that staff bring back to council.
Barrie is rapidly becoming a real estate investment destination for investors from Toronto. Ward 4 Councillor Amy Kosser expressed concerns about the lack of discussion on stopping investors from buying land or units for renting out. The report was ultimately approved.
As there was only one item that was held, we'll go right into that. That's the affordable housing strategy. And Councillor Kungl.
Thank you. I'll put the item on the floor.
Thank you so much. So I didn't really hold this I did not hold this to grill our staff on this, but I think there was a couple of things that stood out to me in the report that I wanted some clarification on, which perhaps can feed into either a later item for discussion or an amendment for staff to investigate as well. Number one, for me, the report and the report from staff, like the actual staff report portion of this, just a piece of feedback, was very easy to understand and was very well done. I found it more difficult to get through the study itself. And so maybe some feedback, just that if we could make it easier for me. And I would guess that other members of council share that, as that I've done a lot of work in the financial field myself and still found it difficult to go through all of the information. The two missing pieces to this were, one, on the causation side. It was really interesting that there was no touch on the effects of levels of immigration, and that would be through the formal process of immigration as well as through the student visa program, which is all over provincial and national news at the moment. And I'm an immigrant to Canada. I have no bias in this front, but there is a mathematical issue that exists in this country right now, from everything I'm reading, that says we have this many people coming in the country, but we're only making this many homes. And yet it wasn't touched on in the report as far as I could tell. And so it just seemed to be completely missing one of the fundamental issues that our country is facing. And I think the federal government's recognized that they're facing that at this point. And I was just wondering, perhaps if our planning department could tell us, was there any discussion on that front? Does it affect the type of housing that we need to build? Was it just not part of the discussion? And what would you recommend going forward to better understand the integration of that data into whatever affordable housing reports we're doing?
Thank you for the question, Mayor Nuttall. I can tell you for sure it came up in some of the technical advisory committee meetings, that type of discussion about, why aren't we talking about decisions, quite frankly, that are being made by different levels of government that have kind of gotten us to where we are. And, the consultant's position, and again, I appreciate you differentiating between what kind of city staff have presented to you and what the consultants have presented to you. And Jen, I'll allow Ms. Roberts to jump in if she can add more than I do. But ultimately, the consultant was just kind of like, look, this is where we're at. Like, these are the numbers. Immigration's not going to stop. There's really no paraphrase, like there's no point in kind of evaluating more and more about immigration policy. Immigration is happening. There was a little bit of a discussion about, you know, kind of where people are coming from and whether they come to Barrie or what have you. Really wasn't part of the work that they did. It's probably the easiest way to put it. So yes, there were a lot of conversations about it, and but it really was a little bit more of a, they started this study by doing that needs assessment, the very first kind of brush that the council saw in June, and kind of this is where we are right now, was a snapshot of where we are, recognizing, as I said, immigration policy is impacting it, but isn't really a part of this study.
So I totally accept that it's not part of the solution, right? But there's a causation part of this study. And the causation part of this study is saying, we didn't build enough rental. There's not enough, social housing that's being built, and investments in social housing. And it does talk about the causation side. Yet, from everything I read, the single biggest contributor is the fact that in Ontario we have a reduction in population happening without immigration. Add immigration in, we have a certain number of people coming into the province. Yet we only have so many houses being built, and so. To me, it felt like a report that was 3 years old or 4 years old that didn't incorporate the actual conversation that we're trying to have, which is what we do going forward. And the reason I'm concerned is, you know, we've had some of these talks with Georgian College, where we've had multiple members around this table in conversation with Georgian College. And it's like, as the demographics of students change, so does the demand for the units that are built for student housing. And so my question is it the same here? Does the origin of the person moving to Barrie who's in need of affordable units, does it affect the built form on the back end in terms of the demand going forward? Or can we look at it as everybody is the same? And maybe the answer is everybody's got the exact same expectations, hopes, and dreams, and so it doesn't matter. But for me, that's a question that I would have loved to have seen answered in here.
Mayor Nuttall, so certainly Georgian College is, as you pointed out, is kind of doing their own housing study. Georgian College was a part of our technical advisory committee. So in terms of that piece, there still are definitely some synergies there. In terms of, does everybody want the same housing choice, or I think everybody just wants housing choices, and what people choose is going to differ based on a whole bunch of things, what they can afford, what they want, you know, all those sorts of things. So we certainly kind of recognize all of that, you know, keeping in mind really that, you know, certainly we can take your comment and kind of go back to the consultant and ask for, you know, some more about that causality piece. But, you know, again, at the end of the day, this was intended to kind of be our kind of a baseline for our strategy and a baseline for our actions. And I think that's kind of the bigger piece to what the consultant wanted to do. But we certainly can kind of go back and ask for, as I said, there was definitely a lot of conversation about it in some of the technical advisory committee meetings. And we can certainly take that back and provide some more information to council for sure.
Okay, thank you. The second thing I think was missing in the actual solution side was a pathway to home ownership. Like it identifies what 10% below market rates would be considered affordable, but what recommendations are put in place. There's recommendations on the rental side, for sure. What opportunities exist on the home ownership side?
So, Mayor Nuttall, the way we had framed the recommendation was to obviously look at these kind of 9 top items, and then, as I said, come back to council with more of an implementation plan. So in terms of like the path to ownership, I think that kind of falls into the bucket of, taking a look at what sort of city incentives, so whether it's a CIP or what have you, I think that's something that staff can come back to with that implementation plan. Certainly heard loud and clear kind of the comments that you gave when we gave the presentation. Home ownership was, one of the biggest things that, I think you said no degree, no job, nothing, put me on a better path than home ownership. So that's something that staff have heard loud and clear, and we really do see that implementation plan as around CIP dollars, and where council may want to spend some other incentive dollars around that home ownership is definitely something that that I think staff can provide council with some options with.
And do you need an amendment to tonight's motion for that, or is that something that's going to happen naturally?
I don't believe there's an amendment to it. I did have a member of council, while I have the floor, ask me, how much direction do you need tonight to explore different things? And I said, we don't actually need too much, to be honest. We've got these umbrella areas that we can take away. If council's okay with these areas, then staff can take away, and we've got a lot of latitude in all of those different areas to come back with that implementation plan with some dollars attached to it for council to decide.
Yeah, thank you. I'll pass it up to Councilor Morales and keep my comment for the end of it.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. I guess my comment to this is based on your question, like what can we do for home ownership? If I recall, and I'm trying to recall a conversation from the Housing Affordability Task Force of the previous council, so their findings would have been in 2022. One of the comments that the chair of that committee, Ray Duhamel, said is that addressing the home ownership side is much more difficult. And I'm not going to speak for the consultants, but I'm presuming that's why it's not on here. And here's why. We as a municipality, unless things have changed since then, we don't have an ability to restrict a person who purchases an affordable unit from then selling it in a hot market. So if somebody buys it January of year one, and they want to sell it in December of year two, that's a 24-month span, and the market goes up $300,000, they could take that equity that technically is theirs, even though they qualify through a CIP subsidy program, and then taking the equity and moving somewhere cheaper, moving up north in Ontario, moving to Saskatoon, whatever. So that was one of the limitations. Now, legal processes might change. Habitat for Humanity has creative sweat equity, and I don't know if they go on title. I don't know how that works. But one of the things that, and I do remember actually with Mr. Duhamel, I asked him for a meeting either before that or way after that. We were talking about many housing things, and he drilled that point home. It's like home ownership from a government perspective. You are very limited, if not completely unable to address that. Now, that's the opinion of one person, the comments of one task force in the past that doesn't exist anymore. I just wanted to give a little bit of clarity as to maybe, not in defense of the consultant, but as to context for that. And I don't know if there's a question in there.
Councilor Rittman, then Councilor Tungle, then Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you, staff, for that report. I have a whole list of jobs that I want to add to your 9 pillars, and I'll send them to you in due course. I don't intend to belabor them here. Some of the numbers that really struck me was that we have got now 350 net new rental units in the last 20 years. Like, we haven't built any, really, when it comes down to rental units and the net increase. We have 5,000 renters living in unaffordable or unsuitable units. And we have something like 3,000 households waiting for social housing. And I agree that whether you're renting or whether you're trying to buy, we are, for the most part in this city, unaffordable, unless you're making a serious amount of dollars. But I want to focus just on the rental pieces first, and that is one of your 9 is a rental protection bylaw, and that strikes me as being something that is low-hanging fruit that we could easily do. Can you, am I correct in that? What's involved in one of those bylaws?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Rima, I agree with you. It is definitely one of the low-hanging fruits that staff could do at a staff level. I don't actually have the process of what you would, like how the actual bylaw would be brought before council and that sort of thing. But definitely, I do think that it is something that we could do. We hadn't seen at the time, like many municipalities have done it, we hadn't actually seen if you've heard the term, like the rent evictions, we hadn't really seen tons of that happening in Barrie, but certainly now, notwithstanding kind of the grim numbers you said before, we actually have quite a few rental buildings either under construction or approved, like the Grove Street, they just got their site plan agreement registered. 37 Johnson is under construction, 233 Dunlop Street. So we actually have had, more like recently, so some good success stories, and we do really want to make sure that we can kind of keep those buildings for sure rental. So that would be most likely one of the quickest implementation tools that staff bring back to council.
Just a follow-up comment. I was hoping also, and I think Councillor Morales mentioned it, we have a lot of students in the Georgian College area that live in single-family homes. Is there some way that we could incentivize Georgian College to build student-appropriate housing so that some of these students would be tempted to move out of the surrounding neighborhood, and then that would free up houses for single-family families? Would that be possible?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Rietma, so I believe yourselves as well as some senior staff are working with Georgian College on their strategy, and one of the things that they did say was trying to leverage some of the relationships that the city has with the development community that may be willing to partner with them on some of those types of projects. So I believe that city staff are going to be at the table with Georgian College when they're making these considerations.
Thank you.
I believe I had Councillor Kungle next, and then followed by Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Through you to Ms. Banfield. A couple of comments. One in particular is I like the layout of the extensive report with respects to the affordable housing strategy, and in particular what I'm assuming others are getting, but I'm still getting is clarification about roles and responsibility around housing. So that's very nicely laid out, especially I believe it's on roles and responsibility between the county and the city, and I think there's some good graphics there that help around that. And because even as people are struggling and talking about rent, I know I'm still getting questions about how can you help me? And it's good to be able to point people in a clarifying way to say, I'm not redirecting you inappropriately, but really what's in our mandate that we can control or influence. So I think it's great to have a resource we can point people to. On the page 6 of that one document, the stat reference there is that there's 5,000 households waiting for social housing in Simcoe County, 60% seeking City of Barrie. And I was wondering about, I know a bit more firsthand, I've been redirecting a lot of people to Simcoe County related to seniors or individuals that are forecasting if they're doing advanced care planning from a housing perspective and things are becoming a little precarious, getting involved with Simcoe County as soon as possible. I'm not sure if it's correct, but I'm hearing that the flow of that wait list is quite slow and limited because they are dealing with some very significant high need situations, whether that's domestic or situations, crisis situations, and other urgencies. So while there's a waiting for social housing, I didn't know how staff keep in touch with that, because I'm assuming that would be an interesting metric over time that may significantly shift around how many are waiting, but how long are they waiting? So how much more vulnerable are people becoming when they're waiting for housing, and what might we see in the system as a result when they become more vulnerable? So what is the likelihood for people to attain housing? Is that on average a year to 3 years? Those are not your stats, but it'd be interesting to see if that's something we get a regular report on by the county, and or if there's a threshold by which staff collaborate. I know when I sat on county council, there was a forum more from the planning department where we shared some of those pieces that were happening around zoning and standards and good learnings, but I didn't know if there is a forum now by which city staff collaborate with county staff on a more regular basis.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Kungle. So we do get a lot of those waiting list stats from the county. Right this moment, we don't have how long the wait list is, and we can certainly ask the county if they have that. As affordable housing and housing affordability is a key issue, there's lots and lots of connections between not only the City of Barrie staff, but City of Orillia, and actually all of the planners in Simcoe County. Some of it's led by the county themselves, which is appropriate as the housing provider. So that's great. Obviously, they have a new general manager who is really dynamic and is doing great things. So we talk with them on a regular basis, and then all the planners meet on a regular basis as well. And certainly as the County of Simcoe has some projects in the City of Barrie, city staff are in constant contact with them.
Brilliant, thank you. Yes, because I would be interested not just around waiting, but how long, and then in proportion for residents of Barrie, so we can understand what that impact factor looks like. My other comment that I was thinking of was years ago, I believe stats were coming out of Toronto, and they had a number by which they looked at the number of households occupied that were more single detached by single seniors. And so there was a picture and a conversation around individuals perhaps being overhoused. So not just occupancy around access, but also then how are we giving other options? And is there a strategy in play that actually targets or looks at, if people do want to move, do they have another option if they've paid off their home and don't want to take on another mortgage or use the equity in their home? But do we give individuals, do we have a strategy that gives an individuals a place to say, if you're living in a home that suited maybe 6 or 8 members of a family and now you're a single individual, how do we look at making housing affordable if people would like to leave that housing situation but don't have a next step or on a different build form? So that's more of a piece. I'm not sure if there's learnings there from Toronto, but I believe that was a big piece when they were looking at access years ago. And in light of that, it's also looking at if people want to stay. I believe we still support a tax deferral, property tax deferral for seniors over 65. So if you actually want to support staying in your home, you can apply to the city and we will defer that up until the point of which you sell the home or it goes through an estate situation. So that's always a good thing, I think, one, to promote for people to maintain housing if they're still struggling but own your home and want to stay in place. But I haven't heard in a while, those are also the situations by which I believe Georgian College was looking at a home share program. And so while we're having conversations, I'm not at those tables, but around where you would or wouldn't want to see housing access for students, I believe that was a really beautiful, viable concept around from a social inclusion and from maximizing individuals that had available space in a home and wanted supplemental income, safely pairing them with a student. I didn't know if that actually had been successful post-COVID when it was paused, and if that's still part of the conversations with Georgian College.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Kungle, to the best of my knowledge, the program is still going, but I don't really have any details, but we can certainly pose those questions.
Okay. It would be great in case there is something there that just needs support around promotion or programming, but also we're in an awareness around where there is maybe accessible housing that residents don't know could be facilitated through the college.
Councillor Kungle, just
yeah.
quickly, on our town home on Monday night, we had a resident of Ward 1 come up afterwards who is part of that program, and so it's still operational, and they speak nothing but praises of the program. And I think not only find a little bit of revenue and helps that student, but also find some fulfillment in it as well. So
thank you for that. I think it's a beautiful concept when we talk about our strategies related to inclusive, connected, safe communities and how we, one, welcome people, especially if you're an international student, but two, in general, just create community within a home that otherwise might be a bit more quiet, especially this time of year when we might be more isolated. My last question, and it goes back, I believe, just to the framing for clarity of Mayor Nuttall's question about when you want to see changes or recommendations forward. But in particular, I was quite interested around the CIP, and on page 19 and 23 goes into some really great components. And we've talked about this at past council, and I think even current, which is we've got money associated to that. We've had a strategy that incentivized affordable housing. We've had a lot of conversation about how to maximize that intention. And you've got 6, I thought, pretty amazing revisions that cover off a broad scope. So in that, it's kind of recommended to kind of look at accepting these recommendations. So is that coming forward through a different table if we're pausing around this? And can you talk about the timing of that?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Kungle, you're right. We actually paused the CIP so we could do this affordable housing strategy to see what came out of it. So we know that we need to update the CIP. That is a separate planning process. We would have to have a public meeting and then come back to council. So we were trying to kind of get through kind of this milestone, and then we'd be kind of like hot on the heels of this. It's going to be looking at updating the CIP, and then at the same token, that would take a look at how to fund the CIP and those sorts of things, and whether the CIP has to change. There's been some successes for sure. Staff and the consultant think that there's probably some ways that we could make it better, and so that would definitely come back to council and it would have to go through a public process as well for the amendments to the CIP.
So when, maybe quick follow-up on that, when is it likely that all of that, knowing that there's public consultation, would happen before intake forms are needed or before the cutoff for budget considerations for the next budget cycle?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Kungle, we actually, so we do have money in the budget from 2022 and then, 2023 that we haven't spent, that we're just carrying it forward, and then we have new 2024 dollars. So at this point, there's probably not enough, there's never enough, but there's a substantial amount for us to at least kind of launch or relaunch a revised CIP that wouldn't necessarily ask for or require council to provide additional dollars, depending on kind of what those incentives are. Okay. And it would be most likely like, hey, let's try this combined funding for one round of CIP, see how it works. I think the other important thing about this strategy as well is like the point of returning back to council every single year to kind of say, I think we need to be very nimble with it. Try something, it'll work, and that's great. We'll keep doing it. We'll try something, it won't, and we'll be like, let's move on. And because the housing space is changing so quickly, maybe next year it'll be something else that we didn't know about and now we want, or maybe something will come out of the Georgian College strategy that we can piggyback on. So I think the important thing is that it's not a static strategy. It is going to have to be very nimble for us to be able to keep up and keeping it effective.
Thank you. And last question, only because I'm seeing kind of 2 things in flow. We've gone ahead and identified our strategy tied to surplus lands and putting them on the market. In this particular strategy, it talks about Simcoe County around land acquisition. It also talks about promotion of considering land. I think we've had those deeper dive conversations about different areas, what we could repurpose, rezone. Is there anything at this point in time, while we've looked at the sale of some property and we know what our assets are, where there are particular parcels of land that are really aligning from a staff perspective to be able to utilize to support the strategy?
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to Councillor Kungle. Council was actually kind of ahead of the game in the surplusing piece discussion, because obviously there's been some staff direction to kind of look at that even outside of the strategy. So council will be hearing more about that kind of in the coming month or 2. So at this point, that's another path that's already being followed by staff through some of the foresight of council from earlier.
Great, thank you. That's all my questions.
Sorry, Councillor, just to add to that question, that answer, I believe CAO Prowse, we've communicated to the county that there is a potential property, should they be interested, that they could look at, and I don't believe we've heard back at this point as of yet.
Through Mayor Nuttall, to members of committee, in fact, the county had issued a call for proposals to municipalities in the area looking for opportunities and submissions on land. Staff are currently reviewing what options we may have, and we anticipate putting a report in front of council for their consideration on properties and options we believe we've identified it could be conveyed or submitted to the county.
Thank you, I was wrong. Is that it? Yep, perfect. Now I'm going to go to Deputy Mayor Thompson.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Through you to Ms. Banfield. On page 8, paragraph 40, it says that the recommendation is for a $3 million CIP, and we're funded in 2024 with 1.2, and 55% of it, which is 660,000 for affordability. What are we spending the other? I just need a breakdown of the other 540.
Through you, Mayor Nuttall, to the Deputy Mayor, it is 5% for heritage, 55% for affordable housing projects, and 45% for redevelopment, so that would be brownfield sites. So that's kind of how the CIP is split at the moment, and ultimately that most likely would be one of the changes that you'd see from staff to most likely increase the weight to the affordable housing projects a little bit lesser than, say, on the redevelopment projects.
So 55 affordable housing, 40 greenfield,
40,
5.
and then 5 for heritage. Yeah, that's my math, sorry. Yeah.
No, it's fine. No, I understood what you meant. So, and that's of the 1.2. Perfect. Okay, that's all. Thank you.
Councillor Harris.
Great, thank you, Mayor Nuttall. And just maybe to follow up on your point about the causation and on section 2.1, what is causing housing affordability to erode? It doesn't specifically mention the demand, the increasing demand of student housing, but it does mention the commodification of the housing market, which I think clearly is part of what we're seeing with the increase in student rentals. And if you casually do a drive around the East End, you'll see most of the properties advertised as investment opportunities, not entry family homes. So I think that's a really important item. And I think, in credit to Councillor Morales, brought us to the attention of the work of Dr. Mike Moffat several years back. And that was when we first learned the importance, impact of the increasing number of students and the impact on neighborhoods. And Councillor Corser and Councillor Morales and I attended the Who Will Swing the Hammer presentation this fall. And, he's furthered his work and further created more detail around the impact of the student housing on both single-family homes and neighborhoods and the cost of housing. So, he offered solutions that really connected to both the provincial and the federal governments, meaning that the province funds the colleges, universities, and the federal government allows the visas to the number of people that can come. So that was part of his solution. But he also put the responsibility more at the college's feet, because traditionally community college has been more of a, you live in this area, you go to this school. Now it's clearly changed, not just that you don't live in Barrie, you might live in London or somewhere else, but you actually don't even live in Canada. So he had really kind of put that as a real key driver. So I know it's not in here specifically, but I'm very hopeful that with this work that Georgian College is involved in this, that they really understand. Because I remember, and it was the prior, I don't know if it's president, but I credit again to Councilor Morales. He really did ask that question, and I think it was 3 years ago. And the answer was, well, the market will take care of itself, basically. So I'm really hopeful that Georgian College has identified this as a key opportunity to invest in their students, because we're seeing students now coming to Canada and being homeless, like starting their education in a shelter, on the street, in a car. So not good enough. So, and I think that's part of the challenge. And also, for those who've been around the student housing environment, when I went to university, you shared a room with somebody else. And those of us who have children who've gone, they're now getting their own room with their own bathroom, so that what's changed, and they become more expensive. But is that really what international students want? And, would they go back to the old model where you actually shared space and you had a roommate and these kind of things? And those who've been into the pods in Guelph know how that thing works, right? So I just really hope that we can impress upon those of us who are on this committee, or town and gown, can really impress upon Georgian College how important it is that they play a really important role in helping our city. And I can tell you from the mental health and addiction side, having done rent supplements, in 2000, when we got our first rent supplements, they were golden tickets for people with mental illness to be able to get nice, affordable apartments in Barrie. Over time, one of the key factors was the competition with students. You couldn't get your rent sub activated because you're competing now with students and young professionals. So all of a sudden now this rent sub for this person with serious mental illness, they can't get it activated. It's either far too expensive to rent, and also the rent sub doesn't give you enough to compete in the market. So actually reduce the number of rent subs you could use because you had to give more money per rent sub. So it's really had an impact across a lot of sectors. So I just say that as a let's go team, let's get together, let's really work together, because the college has to be a part of this solution. If they're going to keep bringing over students, and we see some of the numbers, with Conestoga College, I think it costs more per term than it costs for law school. I can speak to that because I had a daughter in law school. It was incredible for a college program. So they're really, making a lot of money off students, and not students, but not really doing good by them. So I say that. And the other thing I wanted to mention, it's noted affordable home ownership on page 14, and then page 47. We talk about affordable housing within projected major transit areas. And during our public open house, we had a presentation from a gentleman, I'm forgetting his name, but he talked about a group that was really interested in the Home Opportunities program through Michael LeBay, where they're looking at $35,000 as an annual income to be able to afford home ownership. So I'm really hopeful, and I don't, it's more specific, but in those solutions, opportunities for adding affordable housing, affordable home ownership, that hopefully there's more information and action and opportunity with that group, because it seems like just a win-win, given that we want to make sure projected major transit areas like the hub in Allendale, the soon-to-be enhanced Allendale Transit Hub, could be a place where affordable home ownership is right there within, across the road distance from transportation to not just jobs in Barrie, but jobs wherever they get their jobs. So anyway, I say those two things that I think are really important as I see them, and hopefully they can be augmented and supported and maybe initiated through all the work. So thank you for the report and all the work that goes into this. Thank you, Mayor Nuttall.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Morales.
Thank you, Mayor Nuttall. Councillor Harris, whatever coffee you had today, I'm going to buy you the same flavor next week, because that was great. As I was making other points, and I want to talk about some other stuff. As to the Dr. Mike Moffat presentation, for those that attended, you already know. We're still waiting on his notes. He committed in front of us to getting our notes. He's like, nothing more than I like to see politicians writing down notes quickly. I'll send them in. We don't have them yet. We've also have invited him to present. So I trust that hopefully we can get him scheduled soon. I don't fault anybody. He's a busy guy because he's so respected. And finally, on Dr. Mike Moffat, part of his presentation, and I'll let the note speak for himself and him speak for himself, but we have the floor now to speak about this. Part of his presentation is that the government, in his opinion, didn't even properly capture international student immigration in their numbers. What he was essentially saying is, you think your immigration numbers are 300,000-400,000 going up? It's actually add hundreds of thousands more for the GTHA, so us, and then that is why your cities are seeing the increases in rent. Now, it's not about a blame game. You're an immigrant, Mayor Nuttall. I'm an immigrant. But I've said this at a meeting before. When we don't provide the best opportunity for people to come to this country, and I've said it before, I had told a family member, like a second cousin, 2 years ago, who said, hey, violence is coming back up in Colombia. Like, my girlfriend and I are thinking of studying at Georgian College or just in Canada. And what do we do? What are the options? I said, I don't know too much about this. Talk to my dad. Do your own thing. But do you really want to come? It's cold. It's hard to get ahead without learning English like young, and because he's now in his early 20s. And the other one I said, and life is unaffordable, housing. So for me to tell an own family member, a blood member, that like he maybe shouldn't do what my parents did when I was 7 years old and had no choice, what your parents did, I don't know what age you came, I think that should speak for itself. I've said this before, but I'll say it again for the purpose of this meeting. And again, Dr. Mike Moffat is key to this. So yes, that data needs to be connected, as you said, to this report. In addition to the college, thank you, Councillor Harris, for bringing this up. I'm going to give the benefit of the doubt, but I couldn't tell if the comment Councillor Rietma said of like, what do we do? I couldn't tell if you didn't know the answer or if it was just to make sure, because there's new members of council, new staff members, to make sure the answer got. But thank you for bringing it up, because when past president, I want to be emphasized on this, because we have a new president, we have a new relationship, and from what I've heard indirectly, the relationship is really good, and I want to continue allowing the people at that table to foster that. But the past president, the headline is, on Barrie Today, October 26, 2021, college president says that the decreased enrollment has helped ease housing crunch for now. she's speaking in regards to COVID and not in person, and goes, West Moines doesn't believe the best approach right now is to build more student housing. But Morales questions how involved Georgian should be in addressing Barrie's housing woes, and the author is Bob Burton, who's in this room if you want to ask questions. And the quote that she said was, right now we certainly have a housing vacancy in student purpose-built student housing. It's going to be easily 2 years before we get back up to full enrollment. And in addition to that, she goes, we have our own residents, not everything fits all. Nevertheless, Morales asked West Moines if the college or its board has a number in mind for new student housing units if it would build, as it wanted to expand that nursing program. And the response I got was, no, we don't have, and I want to be clear. If you hear me say that I think the best approach is to build more student housing, I'm not sure that's the case right now. So I don't want to be misunderstood by council. It's also my understanding, Mayor Nuttall, that there had been land allocated for phase 2 of the tower that was built in the early 2000s. I don't know where that stands now. And like I said, there's a new administration, and I want to support the conversation there. Out of that meeting on October 26th, I moved a motion to get a meeting between Mayor Lehman at the time, Councilor Reitma, and myself, and related staff. And I voted in favor of that. That was not a unanimous vote. So, because the answer is, I love your approach, Councilor Harris. You give everyone the benefit of the doubt. You're a very nice guy. Town and gown, that's great conversations. But the reality to this is, this has been a conversation for I would say, for close to 8 years. But specifically for 2 years and 3 months since this meeting took place. And we have not seen a new unit added on Georgian College property. I also believe that the private market has not built a purpose-built student rental in that market. So that it's not about like what we should do. These conversations have been had. And I want to be fully transparent. I wouldn't have brought it up otherwise. Councilor Reitma, at the end of this meeting, when Dr. West Moines walked away, the meeting was over. I said to you in front of then Councilor Thompson, I said, and I'm not saying that we should do this, but at that time I said a great way to do this is by tying any future asks for money from the college to increases on purpose-built beds on campus. Basically meaning don't come ask for public money from property taxpayers for your college business operations until you've done that. And the reason I brought it to you is I wanted to defer, because you are the ward councilor. I am a resident of Ward 1, longtime resident, I think longer than you, but you are the ward councilor, and that's what matters. So I wanted to bring that. So to answer your question, what have we done? I brought that to you immediately after this meeting. And it doesn't matter what got done or didn't get done. This needs to absolutely be addressed. And once again, just close the loop on this because I have comments about the other stuff. I trust the new administration. I love the enthusiasm of the president to show up the other day with the students. That's a presence. And I trust the people that have told me that the relationship is great, that there's a willpower. I know there's a study being done on their student housing needs, but we need to get that study and then move on past studies and discussion because this problem is only getting worse. And thank you for Dr. Mike Moffitt, who can validate it for those that want to hear it from somebody with a doctor in front of their name, that the student housing crisis and the inability to build purpose-built student rentals that meet their cultural needs, which means they like to live, specifically the majority of international students like to live in bunk beds and together versus when I lived at the University of Guelph, it was single in a bathroom. That needs to be addressed because it's affecting the families of Ward 1 who are not international students. So that's my comments on Georgian College, and again, I wasn't going to bring that up, but the discussion spurred it. As for the senior student home program, I just have one, and I want to preface it. It's anecdotal, but it is an experience I've had, and I have it in writing from a Ward 9 resident. Her concern with this program, last time we talked about this, it got brought up. She was watching the meeting. She's actually very active in the community. I won't say their name. She had concerns about the program. She tried doing this program, Mayor Nuttall, and I'm so glad that you got feedback that the program works for people. I do not want to be negative on that. But it's an interesting concern that the resident had. Her concern was about the costs of going to an LTB if needed, about the delays in getting a hearing. We've all heard horror stories of 8 to 14 months in Simcoe County because it's region-based, of getting a hearing if there's a tenant-owner dispute. And in addition, she had concerns about what rights would her elderly mother who lives alone have if there was an issue because it's a shared unit. So it gets into this weird thing where it's not an independent unit and like you live with your landlord. And there's also a concern about the delicate intricacies, about the nuances of a senior who may have diminished capacities. So it is very complex, and not trying to muddy the waters saying it's a bad program. What I'm saying is If we need to do advocacy, I see in the consultant's report, one of them is even like, it has 2 stars, but saying that housing is a human right or doing this. One advocacy, in addition to the immigration thing, which you know that I've brought up to you before, is asking the provincial government, I don't know they're taking steps to it, to reforming the landlord-tenant board, because that's affecting tenants, that's affecting landlords, that's affecting people willing to invest capital dollars in the capital markets to build housing. And in addition to that, I have actual in writing, time-stamped responses from a Ward 9 resident saying she would not let her mother rent out the units because of the nuances of her diminished capacities being in the same space as someone else if something were to go awry. So that's LTB reform I think needs to be tied into that program, and hopefully we can see it grow. And then finally, for the comment about implementing rental stock bylaws, it is great, the situation that we saw of a gentleman bringing his life literally here, the council chambers. That really hit an emotional note with me, and I know obviously Toronto has that. You replace, you knock down a rental unit in your new construction, you better have a rental unit at the same rate, or something comparable off-site. But I would strongly caution about implementing it without also implementing permissive zoning reform, which is some of the highest ranked recommendations from the consultant. Here's why. It's important to ensure people retain an affordable unit in a redevelopment situation, on-site new or off-site. But if you only implement the rental stock protection bylaw without allowing the market to build more housing, what you're doing is you're getting in the way of the market building more housing by making it harder to redevelop properties that are poised for redevelopment. It is very crucial not to do a rental stock protection bylaw without also saying essentially, we're making it easier for people to build housing, but make sure you don't displace people who have been there a while. That's fine, but if you say don't displace people, you might as well be making every building heritage because the market will respond accordingly, and the investment money will go to other municipalities. So I'm not going to do the former Councillor Khan, which you would just say, don't you agree, Ms. Banfield, at the end of a rant like that, but thank you for your great comments, Councillor Harris. Tell me what coffee you had today.
Thank you, Councillor. And I'm not seeing any other hands up. So I gave up the floor a long time ago and then went around the table. But there's, with regards to the $3 million that's recommended inside of the report, like an increase in what we need to put aside, how much of it can we write off as to contributions that we're making to the county already? Is there any mix? I know it delineates who's responsible for what, but when it comes down to the actual financial, the costs associated, would you consider any of those dollars already being contributed to actually another level of government?
Mayor Nuttall, so you're right, the $3 million is embedded in the report, but not in the recommendation. So at this point, staff aren't recommending you give $3 million towards it. Through the $3 million through the CIP has always been given directly to charities, property owners, developers. There hasn't been any, it doesn't account for any of the funds that we already give to the County of Simcoe. This was given to the Redwoods, as I said, to the individual people. And it also, we use it for, only for dollar amounts, so the DCs or paying for studies, things like planning application fees that are waived through the CIP and through some of the, is just done as lost revenue. So it doesn't actually come out of the $3 million. So we only use the money for actual money. If that makes sense.
Perfect, thank you. We mentioned earlier here the Home Opportunities Program. There's also Options for Homes, which is another one that I know brought up before, but it was there was originally a development with Baywood Homes over at Mapleview Drive and I think it's St. Paul's Road, if I'm not mistaken. And they had a very similar program where there's a down payment made on behalf of the person who's purchasing the home, but then it goes on title, so when they go to sell it, it doesn't result in whatever the charitable organization is that's putting that forward being out of it. And so that's another organization that I think could be very fruitful for the city. And before we get into the provincial and federal government, which I think are very important here, very, 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 very important to us. I really do believe incredibly strongly that the biggest threat to our next generation is not being able to own, is to be renters forever. And I believe renting forever equates to financial servitude and paying somebody else's mortgage and making somebody else rich. And what it does is it expands the gap between the wealthy and the poor. And that's why I think that we have to have something that shows opportunities for home ownership, whether it's on Burton Avenue and, well, it wasn't Burton, was it? But that area, or any other area of the city, whether it's on a city-owned piece of property or one that's owned by somebody in the private sector. I think it's the most important thing. Every federal and provincial initiative I've seen take place, besides the reduction in revenue to municipalities done by 23, has been focused on rental stock. And that is very, very scary to a kid from government housing, grew up renting, and I can tell you the only security that I found was by buying. And I don't see the possibility of somebody like me doing that today. The federal and provincial government, there was a report that was sent to me by, I did an interview with a couple of individuals who've been appointed by the provincial government, and they sent me a report called, it says, "Will Feds answer the call? Infrastructure investment lags amidst highly taxed housing construction," and it's by an organization called the Canadian Centre for Economic Analysis. And if anyone wants this, I'll send it around. I sent CAO Prowse one of the slides in there I thought was incredibly interesting. And the two slides that I think really hit home the point to me on the provincial, federal, municipal governments. One was who's actually building the infrastructure that's getting housing built, because we know the infrastructure costs are really getting in the way of affordability. And it is the provincial and the municipal governments that are doing it. It's the provincial government is number one, we're number two. The federal government is building 7% of the infrastructure in the country. So that's a very, very, very important piece. And I think the second thing that really fell in line was who, of the levels of government, which levels of government profit from new home construction the most? I would have thought it was us. I honestly would, through taxation. We were actually the lowest. It was actually the federal government, then the provincial government, then the municipal government. Which strikes the question is, well, why would you reduce the revenue to the government that's receiving the least from the production? But that's another conversation, and we do what our parents tell us to do. The federal government has the highest ROI on this. We need the provincial government's commitment to provide funding to municipalities that are good on housing to come in. And we need the federal government's money to come in to even start to work on the things that are inside of this initiative, whether it's rental or it's purchase. Because without that money, I think maybe we're hitting a nail into the 2x4 of the house, but there's about 400 other pieces of wood that need to get done beforehand, and we don't have the resources to even purchase them. So there is so much tied up in the federal and provincial relations here that I wish that the federal and provincial government would get together and get it flowing, because we've been talking about it since before. In fact, the day after the election was when bills started coming from the province, and we still haven't seen that money flowing. So, Councillor Congo.
It might be a more political question on that commentary back through you, Mayor Nuttall. And I could be wrong. But is there not a long, outdated agreement between the provincial and federal government around revenue sharing, cost sharing, that was thought to maybe get done over the last year? Like, is that the tool that we're waiting on for the negotiation of?
There are separate there are separate funding mechanisms federally and provincially. They're not connected. So there's the housing accelerator on the federal side. And I think there was there's actually a supplemental one. I can't remember the name of it. It's much smaller. That's being put in place. And then the provincial one, I can't remember the name of, but it was announced when we were at AMO, which was going to be attached to the measurables of housing production inside of municipalities against the goals that the province gave. But the feds came out and said they're not going to compensate the province or compensate municipalities for the reduction in revenue related to 23 or 109. Councillor Corson.
I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but as long as we're I know this is above, I believe that this is above our pay grade as a municipality, but I don't see any conversations happening about stopping investors in purchasing land or purchasing units to rent out. As to your point that it's important to have that ability to purchase property, to have that as a investment in your future. But I'm not seeing any other levels of government, even if it is something, that conversation that we can have, I'm not sure, but about stopping a numbered corporation or a numbered company from buying up every house that goes for sale, it feels, in my neighborhoods, and I'm sure it happens in others, to actually turn it into units and rent it out. And I'm not seeing any which holds the market to an inflated standard for profit. So I'm not seeing a lot of conversations about how that can be mitigated. We can build as much as we want, but if you have just investors coming in and purchasing the property, it takes that out of families' hands too. So again, that's, I'm sure, something that's not on, I'm not sure if that is something that could be addressed as a municipality.
I don't believe so, and I'm certainly open to any context from public servants. I don't believe it's something that we can do. We can determine how many units are inside a house, so that can either persuade or dissuade investment for rental purposes, but I don't believe that we can determine who or what type of entity gets to purchase a home. The federal government did, to their credit, create the foreign home buyer tax. Thank you. See, I have difficulty even saying the word, and that was maybe about 8 months ago, 9 months ago. So that was maybe the first piece of that.
But yeah, but again, like I said, it doesn't really stop anyone from within our own country. I have a house I'm aware of that people from Manitoba purchased it, and a company from Manitoba purchased it, as well as several other properties, I'm sure, in the area that they turned into multiple rental units in a family neighborhood. So it's not just foreign investors, it's local. It's maybe in province and in our country that this is happening, and that's something that really needs to be looked at, because it's a make and hay kind of initiative for that in this market. So hold that. So just a comment, maybe a better conversation about that later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Right, I don't see any other hands up, so I'm going to call the vote on the housing report. So all those in favor? And it's approved.
Stay tuned for more news and update from Simcoe Community Media. Thank you for watching.